The glass shattered before Mia even understood why her hand was bleeding. "Careful," Vanessa said, not looking up from her drink. "You break things just by standing near them." The hall went quiet in that special way. Rooms go quiet when everyone is pretending not to listen. Hundreds of pack members stood in their finest clothes under lights that made every crystal glass throw small rainbows on the floor. Mia stood in the middle of it, holding a napkin to her palm, wearing a dress that had been altered twice because it was never made for her body in the first place. It was the night of the ranking ceremony, the one night every year when the strongest wolves in the region gathered to see which packs had grown, which had fallen, and which unclaimed wolves might be chosen by an alpha looking for a mate. Mia had not wanted to come. Her mother had insisted. Her father had simply looked away, the way he always did when Vanessa was in the room. "She's fine," Vanessa continued, waving a hand toward her sister, the way someone waves away a fly. "She's always been a little broken, clumsy. Weak wolf, barely worth a rank at all." A few people laughed, not loudly, just enough. Mia felt the heat rise in her face, the old shame settling into her chest like a stone dropped into water, sinking, never quite hitting the bottom. She had heard this before. She had heard it her whole life, in different words, from different mouths, but always landing in the same place. Worthless, spare, extra. She did not look up. She stared at the napkin in her hand, at the small red bloom spreading through the white fabric, and she thought, not for the first time, that maybe this was simply true. Maybe she was broken. Maybe there was nothing underneath the shame except more shame, all the way down. Then the doors at the far end of the hall opened. The temperature of the room changed before anyone said a word. Mia felt it first in her spine, a prickling awareness that ran down through her shoulders and into her hands. She had never met an alpha before, not a real one, not one whose name made grown wolves lower their eyes. But she knew, the way every wolf in that hall knew, exactly what had just walked in. Cade Ashbourne did not announce himself. He did not need to. 6 guards flanked him, but none of them mattered, because every eye in the room had already gone to the man at the center, tall in a way that made the ceiling feel lower, dressed in black, that had no decoration because he needed none. His eyes moved across the room once, slow, unhurried, cataloging every face like a man checking a list he already knew by heart. Mia's mother straightened her spine so fast it looked painful. Her father's hand found the back of a chair. Vanessa smiled the smile she always wore for important people, the one that made her look soft and harmless. The one Mia had learned long ago was a mask worn only for those worth impressing. "Alpha Ashbourne," the pack leader said, hurrying forward. "This is an honor. We had heard you might attend, but we did not dare hope." "I attend where I choose," Cade said. His voice was low, even, the kind of voice that did not need to rise to be obeyed. "I was told there was a wolf here worth ranking. I came to see for myself." The pack leader's eyes flicked, just for a second, toward Vanessa, and Mia understood immediately. This was the moment her sister had been waiting for her whole life. This was the moment everyone in her family had been building toward, quietly, for years. Vanessa was the daughter who trained, who fought, who postured for exactly this kind of attention. Vanessa stepped forward like she had rehearsed it. "Alpha Ashbourne," she said, dipping her head with practiced grace. "It's an honor to finally meet you. I've heard so much." "I did not ask for you," Cade said. The words landed flat, without cruelty, without heat, just fact, laid down like a stone on a table. Vanessa's smile did not slip. Not exactly, but something behind her eyes flickered, some private calculation resetting itself. "I'm sorry," she said. "I asked," Cade said, "about the wolf standing behind you, the one holding her hand like it's the only thing keeping her upright." Every head in the room turned. Mia's stomach dropped somewhere below the floor. She felt the napkin crumple in her fist, felt the blood rushing to her ears, felt every single set of eyes land on her like weight pressing down from all directions at once. "Her?" Vanessa laughed, And it was not a kind laugh. It was the laugh she used when she wanted a room to laugh with her instead of at her. Alpha Ashbourne, I think there's been some confusion. That's my sister. She's... I heard what you called her, Cade said. Broken, worthless. I heard it from the doorway. The silence that followed was total. Even the musicians in the corner had stopped, bows hovering above strings, waiting. Cade crossed the room. He did not hurry, and somehow that made it worse, made every step land heavier than the last, made the whole hall feel like it was holding its breath in unison. He stopped in front of Mia, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, and for one long moment, neither of them said anything at all. Up close, he did not look like a rescuer. He did not look kind. His eyes were the color of storm water, flat and gray and giving nothing away, and there was a scar along his jaw that told its own story without a single word attached to it. He looked, Mia thought distantly, like a man who had never once in his life needed anyone's permission for anything. "Give me your hand," he said. It was not a request. Mia's mind screamed a dozen different warnings at once. She did not know this man. She did not know what taking his hand would mean, what it would cost her, what door it would close behind her forever. But something in his voice left no room for hesitation, and her body moved before her fear caught up to it. She held out her injured hand, the one still wrapped in a bloodied napkin, and Cade took it without flinching, his grip firm but not painful, warm in a way she was not prepared for. "This is the wolf I choose," he said, loud enough for the entire hall to hear. "For the mating ceremony. Her." Vanessa's laugh died somewhere in her throat before it fully formed. For one heartbeat, nobody moved. Then the whispers started, rippling outward from the center of the room like water disturbed by a stone, faces turning to each other in disbelief, in shock, in the particular hunger people have for watching someone else's world turn upside down in real time. Mia's mother's hand flew to her mouth. Her father simply stared, his jaw slack, his eyes moving between his two daughters as though trying to solve a puzzle that had no solution. And Vanessa stood frozen, her carefully built smile cracked clean through, her eyes locked on the sight of the most powerful alpha in the region holding her sister's hand like it was something worth holding. "There must be some mistake," Vanessa finally managed, her voice climbing higher than she probably wanted it to. "Alpha Ashbourne, she's nothing. She's never trained. She's never ranked. She's not even—" "I did not ask what she has done," Cade said, without turning to look at her. "I asked what she is, and I have made my choice." He turned to Mia then, and for just a moment, something in his expression shifted, some small crack in the flat gray of his eyes that she could not name and did not trust. "Do you understand what I am asking of you?" he said, quiet now, quiet enough that it felt like it belonged only to the two of them despite the hundreds of people watching. "This is not a gift. This is a claim. Once I take you from this hall, there is no walking it back." Mia's throat had gone completely dry. Every instinct she had built over years of being told she was small, told she was less, told she was the family's mistake, screamed at her to shrink away, to apologize for existing, to give this powerful stranger an easy way out of a decision he could not possibly mean. But underneath that instinct, buried so deep she almost did not recognize it, something else stirred, something that had been asleep for a very long time. She lifted her chin. "I understand," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. It surprised her almost as much as it seemed to surprise the room. Cade studied her for a long moment, as if weighing the words against something only he could measure, and then he nodded once, the smallest motion, final as a closing door. "Good," he said. "Then we leave tonight." He did not wait for her family's blessing. He did not wait for the pack leader's approval, or for Vanessa's protests, which had already started rising behind them in a tangle of disbelief and fury. He simply turned, Mia's hand still held firmly in his own, and walked toward the doors at the far end of the hall, the crowd parting in front of them like water breaking around stone. Mia caught one last glimpse of her sister as they walked away. Vanessa stood exactly where she had been left, her mouth slightly open, her drink forgotten in her hand, staring after them with an expression Mia had never seen on her sister's face before. It took her a moment to place it. It was fear. Outside, the night air hit Mia's skin like something new, sharp and cold and clean after the heat of the hall. A line of black vehicles waited at the edge of the courtyard, engines already running, guards falling into position without needing to be told. Kael opened the door of the nearest vehicle himself, an act so small and so strange from a man of his standing that Mia almost missed its significance entirely. "Get in," he said. She hesitated, just for a second, her hand resting on the frame of the door, the noise of the hall behind her fading into the sound of wind moving through the trees at the edge of the courtyard. She thought of her mother's face. She thought of her father's silence. She thought of Vanessa's laugh, the one that had followed her through every year of her life like a shadow she could never quite outrun. She got in. The door closed behind her with a heavy final sound, and the vehicle began to move before she had even settled into her seat. Kael sat across from her, silent, his eyes fixed somewhere out the window, his jaw set in a line that gave away nothing at all. Mia looked down at her hand, the one he had held, the one still faintly stinging from the cut across her palm. She did not know this man. She did not know where they were going, or what would be asked of her once they arrived, or whether she had just been rescued from a life of smallness, or simply traded one cage for another, larger one. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, the stone in her chest had shifted, just slightly, just enough to notice. Outside the window, the lights of the hall grew smaller and smaller behind them, until they disappeared completely into the dark. The gates of the Ashbourne stronghold rose out of the darkness like something carved from the mountain itself, iron and stone stacked high enough to swallow the headlights of every vehicle in the convoy. Mia had grown up hearing stories about this place. Now she was riding through its gates as the woman who supposedly belonged to the man who ruled it, and none of the stories had prepared her for how small it made her feel. Guards lined the courtyard when they arrived, standing in perfect rows, their eyes following the vehicle without a single word passing between them. Kael stepped out first, and the entire courtyard shifted its weight toward him, the way a room full of compasses shifts toward true north. Mia followed a step behind, and she felt every eye in that courtyard slide from him to her and settle there, assessing, questioning, doubting. "This is her?" a voice asked. It belonged to a broad-shouldered man near the front of the guards, his arms crossed, his expression carefully arranged into something just short of open disrespect. "This is her," Kael said. He did not slow his stride. "Nathan, see that her rooms are prepared. Tonight." Nathan's eyes moved over Mia once, quick and dismissive, the kind of look that took less than a second and still managed to catalog every flaw she had ever been told she had. "Of course, Alpha," he said, but his tone said something else entirely. Mia said nothing. She had learned a long time ago that saying nothing was often the safest choice, the choice that gave people the least to use against her later. She followed Kael through a set of doors taller than any she had ever walked through, into a hall lined with old banners and older weapons, the air smelling faintly of smoke and stone and something she could not name. He left her at the base of a staircase without ceremony. "Someone will show you to your rooms," he said. "We will speak in the morning." And then he was gone, disappearing down a corridor with two of his guards falling into step behind him, leaving Mia standing alone in a hall that felt larger than her entire childhood home. A young woman appeared a moment later, her uniform crisp, her expression unreadable. "This way," she said, and Mia followed, because there was nothing else to do. The rooms she was given were larger than anything Mia had ever slept in, all soft light and heavy curtains and a bed that looked like it belonged to someone far more important than she felt. She sat on the edge of it for a long time after the young woman left, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a house she did not know, in a life she had not chosen so much as been chosen into. She counted the tiles on the floor near the window, 14 across, 11 down. She counted the exits from memory, one door, one window, both a very long way down. She did not sleep so much as drift, waking every hour to the same four walls, the same silence, the same question circling endlessly in her mind. Why her? Morning came without warmth. A servant brought a tray of food she barely touched and told her the Alpha wished to see her before midday. Mia dressed in the clothes that had been left for her, simple and well-made, nothing like the ill-fitting dress from the night before, and made her way down through corridors that all looked the same until a guard silently redirected her toward a set of double doors at the end of the east wing. Kael was already seated when she entered, a stack of papers in front of him, his expression as unreadable as it had been the night before. He did not stand. He did not offer her a seat. He simply looked up, studied her for a moment, and gestured toward the chair across from him. "Sit," he said. She sat. "You will not be given a title yet," he said, without preamble. "You will not be introduced as my mate to the wider region until the ceremony is complete. Until then, you will be protected, but you will also be tested. My people do not trust easily. They will look for reasons to dismiss you." "They already have plenty," Mia said, before she could stop herself. Something flickered across his face, there and gone too fast to name. "Perhaps," he said, "that is not my concern. My concern is whether you can survive here long enough to prove them wrong, or whether I have made an error." The word landed harder than she expected. An error, as though she were a decision he was already reconsidering, a purchase he was already regretting. "You barely know me," she said. "Why did you choose me at all?" Kael set down the paper in his hand, slow and deliberate, and for a long moment he simply looked at her, his gray eyes moving over her face like he was searching for an answer he had not yet fully decided to share. "I will explain that when I am ready," he said. "For now, it is enough that I did." It was not an answer. It was barely even a deflection, but something in the way he said it, low and certain, made her decide not to push further. Not yet. Not when she did not yet understand the ground she was standing on. The days that followed settled into a strange, uneasy rhythm. Kael was rarely present, called away by matters of the pack that were never explained to her, leaving her to navigate the stronghold on her own, under the watchful, doubtful eyes of guards and servants alike. Nathan, in particular, seemed to take a quiet pleasure in finding small ways to remind her that she did not belong, correcting her posture in front of others, questioning her presence at meals, letting silences stretch just a beat too long whenever she entered a room. Mia bore it the way she had always borne things, quietly, without complaint. She told herself it did not matter, that she had survived worse from people who were supposed to love her, and a house full of strangers could not hurt her more than her own family already had. She was wrong about that, though she would not understand how wrong until later. It was nearly 2 weeks into her stay when the first real crack in the stronghold's calm surface appeared. She was seated at dinner, alone as she often was, when the doors at the far end of the hall burst open and a guard came half running, half stumbling into the room, his face pale and his voice unsteady. "They're at the eastern gate," he said, breathless, not even waiting to be addressed. "The Voss pack. They've breached the outer line." The hall erupted into motion. Guards who had been standing at ease along the walls snapped into formation. Servants scattered toward the interior of the building, and somewhere above them, an alarm began to sound, low and steady, the kind of sound designed to travel through stone. Kael appeared moments later, already dressed for confrontation, his expression sharpened into something colder and harder than anything Mia had seen from him yet. He crossed the hall in long strides, giving orders as he moved, guards falling into step around him like pieces sliding into place on a board. He stopped, briefly, in front of Mia. "Stay in the interior halls," he said. "Do not go near the windows. Do not go near the gates. Do you understand?" "Yes," she said, though her heart was already hammering against her ribs. He studied her for one more second, something passing behind his eyes that looked, for just a moment, like concern, before he turned and disappeared into the chaos unfolding around them. Mia did not stay in the interior halls. She told herself later that it was curiosity, or fear, or the simple human need to understand what was happening around her rather than sit blind in a room and wait. Whatever the reason, she found herself moving toward the sound of shouting instead of away from it, drawn down a servants' corridor that led out near the eastern courtyard, where the confrontation had already begun to spill through a breach in the outer wall. She should not have been there. She knew that, even as she stood frozen at the edge of the corridor, watching guards clash with intruders in the flickering light of torches and emergency lamps, the sounds sharp and chaotic, and utterly unlike anything she had ever witnessed. A hand closed around her arm from behind. She did not think. Her body moved before her mind caught up, twisting hard, driving her elbow back into the ribs of whoever had grabbed her, breaking free with a speed and precision that startled her as much as it startled the man who released her with a grunt of surprise. He was a stranger, dressed in colors she did not recognize, his face twisted with shock as he stumbled back from her. Something old and buried surfaced in that moment, fast and sharp, a flash of memory she did not have time to examine, gone as quickly as it came, leaving only the echo of a fear she could not name pressed tight against her ribs. She did not run, she held her ground. It was clumsy, instinctive, nothing like the trained movements of the guards around her, but it was enough to keep the stranger at a distance until one of Cade's guards arrived and pulled him away entirely. Cade found her moments later, breathing hard, her hands shaking, standing in the middle of a corridor she had been explicitly told to avoid. He did not shout at her, he did not scold her the way she expected. He simply looked at her, at the torn sleeve of her dress, at the way her hands were curled into fists at her sides, and something in his expression shifted permanently, some quiet recalibration she could feel, even if she could not name it. "You were told to stay away from this," he said, quiet, controlled. "I know," she said, "and yet you stood your ground. I didn't have a choice." He studied her for a long moment, the noise of the retreating conflict fading behind them, guards moving through the corridor to secure the breach, servants beginning to emerge cautiously from their hiding places. "Everyone has a choice," Cade said finally. "Most people choose to freeze." He did not say anything else. He simply turned, gesturing for her to follow him back toward the interior of the stronghold, and Mia realized, walking behind him through the smoke-tinged air, that something between them had changed in the space of that single tense night. He no longer looked at her like a mistake he might need to correct. He looked at her like a question he had not yet finished asking. Later that night, alone in her room again, Mia sat by the window and watched the guards moving across the courtyard below, torches bobbing like fireflies in the dark, the alarm long since silenced. Her hands had finally stopped shaking, though the memory of the moment in the corridor lingered, sharp and strange, like a splinter she could feel but not quite locate. A knock came at her door, soft, almost hesitant, so unlike the confident stride she had come to associate with the man on the other side of it. She opened it to find Cade standing there, still dressed in the clothes from the confrontation, a faint line of dust across one shoulder. "You are unharmed," he said. It was not quite a question. "I'm fine," she said. He did not move to leave. For a long moment he simply stood there, filling the doorway, his gray eyes studying her with an intensity that made her chest feel tight in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" he asked. The question landed somewhere old and closed off inside her, a door she had shut a long time ago and had no intention of opening for a man she had known less than a month. "I didn't learn it," she said. "It just happened." Something in his expression told her he did not believe that. Not entirely, but he did not push. He simply nodded, once, and took a step back from the doorway. "Rest," he said. "Tomorrow, you begin training. Properly this time." He was gone before she could ask what had changed his mind, disappearing down the corridor the same way he always did, leaving her alone with the quiet hum of the stronghold settling back into its uneasy peace around her. Mia closed the door and leaned against it, her heart still beating faster than it should have been, and for the first time since she had left her family's hall in a borrowed dress and a bleeding hand, she allowed herself to wonder if perhaps she was not quite as broken as she had always been told. The training yard at dawn smelled like turned earth and cold metal. Mia stood at its edge in borrowed gear that fit her better than any dress she had ever owned, watching a woman named Grace circle her slowly, arms loose, eyes sharp. "Again," Grace said. "And this time, stop apologizing with your body every time you throw a punch." Mia had not realized she was doing it until Grace pointed it out. Every strike she threw came with a small, unconscious flinch afterward, as though she expected to be scolded for daring to hit something at all. It took days to unlearn. It took weeks to stop entirely. Grace was patient in a way none of Cade's people had been so far, patient in the specific way of someone who had once been underestimated herself and refused to pass that particular cruelty forward. She did not coddle Mia, and she did not mock her either. She simply corrected, again and again, until the corrections became instinct. "You've got good instincts," Grace said one morning, after Mia had managed to sweep her off balance for the first time. "Untrained, rough as sandpaper, but good." "Everyone here acts like I fell out of the sky knowing nothing," Mia said, breathing hard, hands on her knees. "Because you did," Grace said, not unkindly, "but falling from nowhere and having nothing inside you are two very different things. Most people around here haven't figured out the difference yet." Word of Mia's training spread through the stronghold the way all things spread in a place with too many idle eyes and too little to occupy them. The dismissive looks did not disappear entirely, but they changed shape, curiosity creeping in at the edges where certainty had been before. Nathan, in particular, seemed to watch her with a new kind of attention, as though recalculating some private equation he had assumed was already solved. Cade watched her train exactly twice in the first month, standing at the edge of the yard with his arms crossed, saying nothing, leaving before she could catch more than a glance of his expression. She told herself it did not matter whether he approved. She trained anyway, because for the first time she could remember, the ache in her muscles after a long session felt like proof of something rather than punishment for it. It was in the 6th week that Vanessa arrived. Mia heard about it before she saw it, a ripple of whispers moving through the stronghold faster than any official announcement could have traveled. Her sister had requested an audience, claiming urgent family business, and Cade, for reasons Mia did not fully understand, had granted it. She found Vanessa waiting in one of the smaller receiving rooms, dressed in a way that suggested she had spent considerable time deciding exactly how impressive to look, her posture perfect, her smile already arranged for whoever walked through the door. The smile faltered slightly when she saw who it actually was. "Mia," Vanessa said, recovering quickly, "you look different." "I've been training," Mia said. She did not sit. She did not offer refreshments. She simply stood in the doorway, watching her sister with an expression that gave away considerably less than it once had. "I can see that," Vanessa said, her eyes flicking briefly over the new muscle in Mia's arms, the straighter line of her shoulders, the way she no longer seemed to be trying to take up less space in the room than she occupied. "I came because Mother is worried. She hasn't heard from you in weeks." "Mother knows exactly where I am," Mia said. "She could have called." "You know how she is with all this alpha business," Vanessa said, waving a hand as though the entire concept were an inconvenience rather than the thing that had upended both their lives. "Father sends his regards." "Does he?" Mia said. It was not a question. Vanessa's smile tightened at the edges. She had come here expecting something, Mia realized. Some version of her sister that still flinched at implied criticism, still scrambled to fill silences with apology, still shrank when challenged. That version of Mia had not entirely disappeared, but it no longer answered first. "Look," Vanessa said, dropping the pleasant tone entirely. "I'll be honest with you. Things have been difficult since you left. People talk. They ask why the alpha chose the sister nobody expected, and it makes the family look—" "Look what?" Mia said. Foolish? For spending years telling everyone I was worthless, only to have the most powerful man in the region prove you wrong in front of the entire pack. Something flickered across Vanessa's face, quick and unguarded, gone before it could fully form. For just a moment, Mia thought she saw something that might have been fear, or shame, or some tangled combination of both, buried under years of careful practice at appearing untouchable. I never said you were worthless, Vanessa said, quieter now. You said it that night, Mia said. In front of everyone, you've said versions of it my whole life. I was joking. You weren't, Mia said, and even if you had been, everyone laughed like it was true. That's the part that stayed with me, not the words, the laughing. Vanessa did not have an answer for that. She stood there, her carefully arranged composure cracking at the seams, and for the first time in either of their lives, Mia watched her sister struggle to find a single thing to say that would make her feel better about herself. I should go, Vanessa said finally, gathering herself, retreating back into the practiced grace that had always been her armor. Give my regards to the Alpha. I will, Mia said. She watched her sister leave the receiving room with her spine straight and her steps measured, and Mia realized, standing alone in the quiet afterward, that she felt none of the satisfaction she had once imagined this moment would bring. There was no triumph in it, just a strange, hollow kind of clarity, like a wound finally being cleaned out, instead of left to fester beneath a bandage. That evening, Kael found her on the eastern balcony, watching the last light fade behind the mountains. Your sister has left the grounds, he said, coming to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cooling evening air. I know. You did not tell me she was coming. I didn't know she was coming, Mia said. And I wouldn't have asked you to keep her out. She's still my sister. Kael was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the darkening horizon. In my experience, he said eventually, the people who hurt us the most rarely announce themselves as enemies. They call themselves family. They call it honesty. They call it love, sometimes, which is the cruelest trick of all. Mia glanced at him, surprised by the weight in his voice, the specific ache underneath the words that suggested he was not speaking only of her family. You sound like you're speaking from experience, she said. Everyone in a position like mine has scars they don't discuss at dinner, he said, and something in his tone closed the subject as firmly as a door. They stood together in silence after that, watching the sky darken from orange to deep blue to something close to black, and Mia found, unexpectedly, that she did not want to fill the silence with words. It was the kind of quiet that did not need explaining. The forced proximity came 2 days later, when a routine patrol turned into something else entirely. Kael had insisted on accompanying the border check himself, a decision his advisors clearly disapproved of but did not dare voice too loudly. Mia had been included at the last moment, Grace citing her progress in training as reason enough for practical field experience, though Mia suspected the real reason had more to do with Kael's own unspoken request than any training curriculum. The storm arrived without warning, the kind that rolled down from the mountains fast enough to catch even experienced trackers off guard. Within 20 minutes, the patrol had scattered for shelter, visibility dropping to almost nothing, rain coming down in sheets that turned the forest floor to mud beneath their boots. Mia found herself separated from the main group, stumbling through the downpour until a hand caught her arm and pulled her beneath the overhang of a rocky outcrop. Kael. They stood pressed together in the small, dry space, both soaked through, both breathing hard from the scramble through the storm, close enough that Mia could feel the heat coming off him despite the freezing rain. You should have stayed with Grace, he said, though there was no real anger in it. You should have stayed with your own guards, she said. Something that might have been the beginning of a laugh moved across his face, quickly suppressed, though not quickly enough to hide entirely. Fair, he said. They waited out the worst of the storm in that small space, the silence between them filled with the sound of rain hammering against rock, and somewhere in that waiting, the careful distance they had both maintained since the night of the ranking ceremony began, quietly, to erode. "Can I ask you something?" Mia said, watching the rain instead of him. "You can ask. Why did you really choose me? That night. You could have chosen anyone. My sister would have given you exactly what she thought you wanted." Cade was quiet for a long moment, long enough that Mia thought he might not answer at all. "Because everyone in that room was watching her," he said finally, "and nobody was watching you, except me. I saw the way you held yourself when they laughed, like you'd built an entire life around absorbing exactly that kind of blow without letting it show on your face. That takes a particular kind of strength, the kind most people mistake for weakness because it doesn't announce itself." The words settled into Mia's chest with unexpected weight, cutting straight through years of carefully built armor she had not realized she was still wearing. "I don't feel strong," she said quietly. "Most days, I still feel like the girl standing in that hall with blood on her hand, waiting for someone to tell her she deserves to be there." "You were thrown back," Cade said, something in his voice gentling in a way she had not heard from him before. "Weren't you? Before all this. Something happened to you, a long time ago, and some part of you never fully came forward from it." Mia's breath caught. She had told no one about the years before Vanessa's cruelty had become the loudest voice in her life, the years that had shaped the flinch Grace was still training out of her body, the reason her instincts turned to fighting instead of freezing in that corridor during the confrontation weeks earlier. She had buried it so deep she rarely let herself examine it directly, let alone speak it aloud to another living person. "I don't talk about that," she said. "I'm not asking you to," Cade said. "I only wanted you to know that I see it. Whatever it was, I'm not asking you to explain it to me." She turned to look at him then, rain still falling steadily beyond the edge of their shelter, and found him watching her with an expression that held none of the calculation she had seen in him during their first meetings, none of the flat authority he wore, like a second skin in front of his people. Just something quieter, something that looked, dangerously, like understanding. Neither of them moved to close the remaining distance between them. Neither of them needed to. The moment held itself, suspended, full of everything neither of them was ready to say aloud, until the rain finally eased enough for the rest of the patrol to find them, and the world rushed back in around them, loud and ordinary and entirely unresolved. They did not speak of it again that day, or the day after, but something had shifted, quiet and permanent, the way a single crack can change the shape of an entire piece of stone even when nothing on the surface looks any different at all. Grace noticed first. She always did. "You're smiling more," she observed one morning, watching Mia work through a training sequence with more precision than she had shown even a week before. "Am I?" Mia said, unable to fully suppress the small, private curve of her own mouth. "You are," Grace said. "It looks good on you. Took you long enough to figure out you're allowed." Mia did not answer that. She simply returned to her training, the rhythm of it now familiar in her muscles, the old flinch almost entirely gone, replaced by something steadier, something that no longer apologized for taking up space in the world. For the first time since she had left her family's hall with blood on her hand and shame in her chest, Mia allowed herself to imagine a version of her life that did not orbit entirely around the question of whether she deserved to exist within it. She did not yet know how quickly that fragile new certainty would be tested. The message arrived folded inside an ordinary envelope, delivered by a courier who claimed to have no knowledge of its contents, and by the time Cade finished reading it, his face had gone completely still in a way Mia had learned to recognize as far more dangerous than open anger. "What is it?" she asked. "The Voss pack," he said. "They want a meeting. They say they have something of mine." He did not look up from the paper. Mia crossed the room and read it over his shoulder before he could stop her, the words arranged in careful, mocking script, naming a location, a time, and a single condition for negotiation. "Bring the woman you claimed at the ranking ceremony. Alone, or we finish what we started at your gate." Mia's stomach dropped straight through the floor. "They mean me," she said, though it was not a question. "They will not have you," Cade said, his voice flat, final, carrying none of the calm authority she had grown used to. This was something else entirely, something colder, something with teeth. "Then what will you do?" "I will handle it," he said, and the finality in his tone told her the conversation was over whether she agreed to it or not. She did not agree to it. 3 days later, while Kael was occupied with a delegation from a neighboring territory, Mia slipped away from the training yard on the pretense of collecting supplies from the eastern storerooms, a route she had walked a dozen times without incident. This time the storeroom was empty when she arrived, and the door closed behind her before she could react. 3 unfamiliar figures already inside, waiting. She fought. It was instinct now, not the clumsy panic of the corridor weeks before, but something sharper, faster, the product of months spent under Grace's relentless correction. It was not enough. There were 3 of them, and they had planned for resistance, and within minutes she was subdued. A cloth pressed over her mouth, the world tilting sideways into darkness before she could call for help. She woke in a cell with stone walls and a single barred window too high to reach, her wrists bound, her head throbbing with a dull, persistent ache. A man she did not recognize watched her from the other side of the bars, his expression carrying the particular satisfaction of someone who believed he had already won. "Alpha Ashbourne's little mistake," he said. "Nathan told us you were a rescue project. He wasn't wrong." Mia said nothing. She had learned, somewhere in the last few months, that silence was no longer a shield she hid behind, but a weapon she chose to wield, and she used it now, watching the man with a steadiness that seemed to unsettle him more than any protest would have. "Nothing to say?" he pressed. "Nothing worth wasting on you," she said. He laughed, though it did not quite land the way he wanted it to. "We'll see how long that lasts," he said, and left her alone with the sound of her own heartbeat and the distant echo of voices somewhere beyond the cell. She did not wait for rescue. She spent the following hours studying every inch of the cell available to her, testing the bars, the lock, the loose stone near the base of the wall that gave slightly under pressure. She thought of Grace's voice in her ear, correcting her stance, telling her that strength was not about the size of the obstacle, but the patience to find its weakest point. She thought of the storm shelter, of Cade's voice telling her he saw the strength she had spent her whole life mistaking for weakness. She thought of her sister's laugh, and for the first time, it did not shrink her at all. It simply reminded her of everything she had already survived long before any of this began. When the guard finally returned to check on her, alone, careless with the confidence of a man who assumed his prisoner posed no real threat, Mia was ready. The loose stone came free with a solid weight in her hand. The guard did not expect resistance from a woman he had already decided was harmless, and that assumption cost him the only advantage he had. She did not need to overpower him. She only needed enough time to reach the keys at his belt, enough chaos to slip past him into the corridor beyond, enough of the training Grace had drilled into her to keep moving even as alarms began sounding somewhere deep in the compound. She made it 3 corridors before real trouble caught up with her. It was Cade's voice she heard first, distant, sharp, cutting through the chaos, with an authority that sent a wave of relief through her entire body even before she saw him. He had come. Of course he had come. But by the time their eyes met across the smoke-filled corridor, she was already free, already moving, already proof that she had not simply waited to be saved. "You're supposed to be in a cell," he said, closing the distance between them fast, his hands finding her shoulders, checking for injury with an urgency he did not bother to hide. "I got bored," she said, and the words came out steadier than she expected, almost light despite everything. Something in his expression cracked open then, relief and fury, and something else entirely tangled together too fast to separate. "I told them there would be a war if they touched you," he said. "I meant it." "You don't need a war," Mia said. "I got out. I'm fine." "That is not the point," Cade said, and for the first time since she had known him, his voice shook, just slightly, just enough to betray exactly how much this had cost him to walk into. "The point is that they believed they could take what belongs to me and use it against me. That cannot stand. Not for my sake, for yours. The fighting that followed was swift and decisive. Guards from the Ashbourne stronghold converging on the compound in numbers the Voss pack had clearly not anticipated. Mia did not watch all of it. She was pulled back to safety by guards under strict orders, the moment Kael confirmed she was unharmed, though what she did see confirmed everything she needed to know about the cost of crossing a man like Kael Ashbourne. It was over within the hour. The Voss pack's leadership surrendered rather than face complete destruction, their claims to territory and influence stripped away in a negotiation that left no room for argument. Word of what had happened spread through the region faster than any of it could be contained, and by the following morning, Mia's name was known in places it had never reached before, no longer attached to whispers of worthlessness, but to something else entirely. Her family heard, of course. Word like that always traveled fastest to exactly the people who least deserved to hear it comfortably. Her mother called first, her voice tight with an anxiety that sounded almost like genuine concern, though Mia could not fully separate it from the underlying fear of what the family's reputation might suffer if the story spread the wrong way. Her father said little, as he always did, though for the first time Mia heard something in his silence that might have been shame rather than simple avoidance. Vanessa did not call at all. Mia found she did not mind. She sat on the eastern balcony that evening, wrapped in a blanket against the cooling air, watching the last of the smoke from the confrontation drift and dissolve against the darkening sky, and realized she felt something she had not expected to feel at all. Steady. Kael found her there an hour later, freshly changed, the weight of the day still visible in the set of his shoulders, even as he settled beside her without a word. "You should not have left the stronghold to go to the storeroom alone," he said finally. "I know. And you should not have escaped that cell on your own. I know that too." He turned to look at her then, and whatever anger had been simmering beneath his controlled exterior seemed to drain away all at once, replaced by something far more exposed. "I have never," he said slowly, "been afraid of losing anything the way I was afraid of losing you." Mia's breath caught. She had waited her whole life to hear something like that said about her, and she had never once imagined it would come from a man like this, in a moment like this, after everything that had just happened. "I'm still here," she said quietly. "I know," Kael said, "and I intend to make certain nothing like this happens again." She did not tell him that she did not need certainty of that kind, that she had already proven, in that cell and in that corridor, that she no longer needed to be kept safe the way glass needs to be kept safe. She let the moment simply exist instead, the two of them sitting together in the cooling dark, the worst of the danger finally behind them, something new and fragile and entirely undefined settling quietly into the space between them. Neither of them spoke of it further that night, but something had shifted, permanent and undeniable, in the wake of everything that had nearly been lost. The hall looked the same as it had the night everything began. Same crystal lights throwing small rainbows across the floor. Same banners hanging from the same high rafters. Same gathering of pack members dressed in their finest clothes, waiting to witness whatever the evening had in store for them. Mia stood at its center this time, not at its edge. The dress she wore had been made for her exactly, every seam fitted to her body, rather than borrowed and altered from someone else's life. She did not feel like an afterthought standing beneath those lights. She did not feel like a spare. She stood with her spine straight and her chin level, the same way she had learned to stand in the training yard, the same way Grace had spent months correcting into her muscles until it no longer required conscious effort at all. Kael stood beside her, dressed in ceremonial black that mirrored what he had worn the night he first crossed a crowded room to take her hand. The pack leader, who officiated the ceremony, spoke of tradition, of bonds forged before witnesses, of the weight and honor carried by a mate chosen freely by an alpha of his standing. Mia barely heard the words. She was watching Kael instead, the small private curve at the corner of his mouth that he rarely allowed anyone else to see, reserved, it seemed, only for her. "Do you take this claim freely?" the pack leader asked, and without reservation. "I do," Kael said, his voice carrying easily through the silent hall. The pack leader turned to Mia. "And do you take this claim freely, and without reservation?" For one long moment, Mia let the silence stretch, not out of hesitation, but simply to feel the full weight of the question settle into her before she answered it. She thought of the girl who had stood in this exact hall months earlier, with blood on her hand and shame pressing down on her chest, like something she would never fully climb out from beneath. She thought of every version of herself who had ever shrunk to make room for someone else's comfort. "I do," she said, steady, clear, filling every corner of the silent room. The hall erupted into applause, warm and genuine in a way it had not been the night of her humiliation, and Mia felt something settle inside her that she had not expected to feel this completely. Not relief, not even happiness exactly, though there was plenty of that too, something closer to arrival, like she had finally reached a place she had been walking toward her entire life without knowing it existed. Her mother approached afterward, tears bright in her eyes, and for once, Mia let her embrace happen without flinching away from it, though she noticed, distantly, that she no longer needed her mother's approval the way she once had. It was simply there, offered freely, and she accepted it for what it was worth, without letting it define anything about her own sense of herself. Her father said little, as he always did, but he took her hand in both of his for a long moment before he stepped away, and Mia understood that this, too, was the only apology he knew how to offer. Vanessa arrived late, slipping quietly into the back of the hall in a dress far more modest than anything Mia had ever seen her wear before. She did not approach the front. She did not seek attention, or applause, or any of the things she had spent her whole life chasing. She simply stood near the doors, watching the ceremony conclude with an expression Mia could not entirely read from across the crowded room. It was Mia who crossed the hall to her, once the formal proceedings had ended and the celebration had begun to loosen into music and conversation and the easy noise of 100 private gatherings unfolding at once. "You came," Mia said. "I wasn't sure I should," Vanessa admitted, her eyes darting briefly toward the floor before returning to her sister's face. "After everything I said, everything I did. But you came anyway." "I did." Mia studied her sister for a long moment, searching for the old ache that had always accompanied conversations like this one, the familiar, hollow feeling of being reduced to something small in the presence of someone who had always known exactly how to make her feel that way. She could not find it. It was not that the memory of the pain had disappeared entirely. It was simply that it no longer had the same grip on her that it once did. "I'm not going to pretend it didn't hurt," Mia said. "What you said, what you've always said, it hurt for a very long time." "I know," Vanessa said quietly. "But I'm not carrying it anymore," Mia said. "Not the way I used to. I don't need you to apologize for it to mean anything. I don't need anything from you at all. Really. That's the part that surprised me most." Vanessa's composure, so carefully maintained through every difficult conversation Mia had ever witnessed her navigate, finally cracked, just slightly, at the corners. "I'm sorry," she said, the words coming out rough, unpracticed, entirely unlike the smooth performances Mia had grown up watching her sister deliver. "I believe you," Mia said, and she found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she did. It was not forgiveness exactly. It was not the tearful reconciliation either of them might once have imagined for this moment, back when they were girls, sharing a childhood home neither of them had chosen. It was simpler than that, and in its own way more honest. It was two sisters standing in the same hall where one of them had once tried to make the other disappear, both of them finally seeing each other clearly for the first time in years. Vanessa left not long after, quietly, without ceremony, and Mia let her go without any lingering need to call her back. Kael found her later, near the same window where she had once stood watching the lights of this same hall disappear behind a departing vehicle, uncertain of everything that awaited her. Now she stood in that same spot, certain of nearly everything that mattered. "You look thoughtful," he said, coming to stand beside her. "I was remembering the last time I stood here," she said. I didn't know if I was being rescued or just claimed by someone else who wanted to use me. And now? Mia turned to look at him, at the gray eyes that had once given away nothing at all, and now, in the quiet privacy between them, gave away everything. Now I know I chose this too, she said. Not just you choosing me, both of us, choosing each other. Kael reached for her hand, the same hand he had taken that first night, still faintly marked by the old scar from the glass that had shattered, before she understood why. This time, his grip carried none of the possession it once had. It carried something steadier, something equal. They called you broken, he said quietly. They called you worthless. They were wrong, Mia said. They were never right, Kael said. Not for a single moment. I saw that the night I walked into that hall. I have only ever been waiting for you to see it too. Outside the tall windows, the same mountains stood exactly as they always had, dark and steady against a sky full of stars, indifferent to everything that had unfolded beneath them. Inside, the celebration continued, warm and bright, filled with people who had once doubted the woman now standing at its center, and now, one by one, found themselves unable to remember exactly why. Mia stood in the middle of that light, Kael's hand in hers, and understood, finally and completely, that she had never been the thing they said she was. She had only ever been waiting for the world to catch up to what she already carried inside her all along.